The grand halls of the Exaraxis royal palace were filled with light, yet Princess Varel felt only darkness in her heart. The towering walls, carved from shimmering crystal, reflected the glory of her people, but to her they were just cold and empty. She had lived in this palace since birth, yet it never felt like home. Virel was different, and in the Exaraxis Empire, being different was the same as being unworthy. The Exaraxians were a proud species, tall, powerful, and built for battle. Their exoskeletons were as strong as steel, their movements graceful yet deadly. Every child was expected to be a warrior, a leader, or a scholar of great renown. But Virel had been born with a flaw. Her exoskeleton was fragile, her limbs thinner than they should be, and her sensory tendrils, important for detecting danger, were weak. She was an embarrassment to the royal bloodline. Her father, Emperor Sci-Fi, had given her one last chance. "You will find a mate within the next cycle," he had declared, "or you will be exiled from the empire. I will not have a weakling in my lineage." Virel had pleaded, had tried to reason with him, but there was no mercy in his eyes. To him, strength was everything. She was his only daughter, yet he looked at her as if she was a stranger. And so, the great halls of the palace were filled with suitors today. Nobles, warriors, scholars, all gathered to see the princess. The emperor had made a public announcement. Whoever married Virel would gain favor, wealth, and power. But as she stood before them, dressed in her finest robes, she saw nothing but disgust in their eyes. The first noble, a high-ranking general, stepped forward. He examined her with cold calculation before speaking. "A ruler must be strong," he said. "You are not strong." He turned and left without another word. The next suitor, a brilliant scientist, shook his head. "A partner must be capable. You would slow me down." One by one, they rejected her. Some gave cruel smiles. Others simply ignored her presence, as if she were nothing. Virel clenched her hands, her claws digging into her palms. She wanted to scream, to shout that she was more than just her body. But what good would it do? The whispers grew louder. Why does she even try? She should accept her fate. A broken princess is no princess at all. Her heart ached, but she refused to cry. Not here. Not in front of them. Then the emperor stood, his voice echoing through the hall. "Is there no one who will take her?" Silence. Virel lowered her gaze. She had expected this, but the pain still cut deep. She had been rejected by her own kind, her own people. Just as the emperor was about to declare her exile, a voice rang out from the crowd. "I will." Gasps filled the hall. Heads turned. Standing at the back, leaning casually against a pillar, was a human. Elias Carter. A former diplomat from Earth, now a simple trader, he was an outsider in every sense. The Exaraxians barely tolerated humans, seeing them as weak, unremarkable creatures. Elias, with his unarmored skin and smaller frame, looked like a joke compared to the towering Exaraxians around him. The emperor narrowed his eyes. "You dare step forward, human." Elias shrugged. "Why not?" He glanced at Virel. "She looks like she deserves better than all of you." The crowd erupted in laughter. A human, offering to marry Exaraxian princess. It was absurd. But Elias wasn't joking. He walked toward her, his expression calm. Unlike the others, he wasn't sneering, wasn't looking at her with pity or disgust. He extended his hand. "Princess Virel," he said, "can you be my wife?" The room fell silent. Virel stared at him, unsure what to think. Was this a trick? A cruel joke? But as she looked into his eyes, she saw no mockery, no deceit, just a simple question. A choice. For the first time in her life, someone was giving her a choice. She took a deep breath and placed her hand in his. Elias Carter never planned to make history. He was just a simple trader, surviving in a galaxy that barely acknowledged humanity's existence. But now, He stood in the grand palace of the Xyraxis Empire, holding the hand of a princess that no one else wanted. The silence in the room was thick, heavy with disbelief. The nobles and warriors of the court stared at him as if he had lost his mind. A human, offering to marry a Xyraxian princess. It was unthinkable. The emperor's piercing eyes studied Elias, his expression unreadable. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "You are aware of what you are asking, human." His voice was calm but carried the weight of authority. "Do you truly wish to take this burden?" Elias glanced at Varel. She had not spoken yet, her hand still in his. He could feel her uncertainty, her hesitation. She was waiting for him to change his mind, waiting for him to laugh and walk away like all the others. But he didn't. "I do," Elias said firmly. The hall erupted into chaos. Some laughed, others shouted in protest. "This is an insult to the royal bloodline," one noble growled. "The princess deserves a proper match, not some weak-skinned human," another spat. The emperor raised his hand, and the hall fell silent once more. His gaze flickered between his daughter and the human standing beside her. He saw something in Elias, something different. "Very well," the emperor finally said. "You will take her as your wife." Gasps filled the room. But the emperor continued, "If you fail to provide for her, if you prove unworthy, you will be cast out, and she will be exiled. Do you understand, human?" Elias nodded. "I understand." The emperor turned to Varel. "And you? Do you accept this?" Varel hesitated. She had never been given a real choice before. But as she looked at the faces of the nobles, filled with scorn and pity, she realized something. Elias was the only one who had offered her a future. "I accept," she said softly. The emperor waved his hand. "Then it is done. You are now bound by Xyraxis law. May you survive what comes next." The ceremony was over, and Elias's new life had just begun. A new beginning. The moment they left the palace, Elias knew things wouldn't be easy. Varel was silent as they walked to the spaceport. Her delicate frame moved stiffly, her exoskeleton weaker than the average Xyraxian. The noble onlookers whispered as they passed, their gazes filled with either pity or disgust. Elias sighed. "They really don't like me, huh?" Varel glanced at him. "They don't like me either," she admitted. He chuckled. "Guess we have that in common." She said nothing. Elias had spent years traveling the galaxy, but he had never truly understood the Xyraxians until now. They were strong, yes, but also strict, unbending in their ways. Strength was everything to them, and anyone who lacked it, whether human or Xyraxian, was cast aside. Varel had been cast aside, and now so had he. They reached Elias's ship, a small, worn-down freighter named the Starfall. It wasn't much, but it was home. "Welcome aboard," Elias said as the doors hissed open. Varel hesitated before stepping inside. The ship was nothing like the palace. The walls were old and scratched, the floor uneven in places. The air smelled of metal and machine oil. It was nothing like the luxury she had known all her life. But it was hers now. Elias led her to a small cabin. "This'll be your room. Not fancy, but it's comfortable." She sat on the bed, testing its softness. "It's different." "Yeah, well, I'm not royalty," he said with a grin. "Hope you don't mind a little adventure." She looked around, her expression unreadable. "I don't know what to expect." Elias shrugged. "Neither do I." For a moment, there was silence. Then, to his surprise, Varel gave a small, hesitant smile. "Then I suppose we will learn together." Elias grinned. "That's the spirit, princess. Uncertain paths." Their journey began. Elias took them to the outer colonies, where humans and aliens alike struggled to survive. He introduced Varel to the life of a trader, dealing with supplies, negotiating with merchants, and sometimes avoiding trouble. But Varel wasn't used to this life. She struggled with the simplest tasks, lifting crates, understanding different currencies, even speaking to common traders. She had lived in a palace her whole life, shielded from the real world. Now she was expected to survive in it. One day, while trying to carry supplies to the cargo bay, she tripped and fell. The heavy crate crashed beside her, and she winced in pain. Elias rushed over. "Hey, you okay?" She looked away, ashamed. "I'm not strong enough for this." He sat beside her. "Maybe not yet, but that doesn't mean you won't be." She frowned. "I was born weak. That won't change." Elias smirked. "You ever heard of humans?" She blinked. "I am speaking to one." He laughed. "Yeah, but do you know what we do best? We adapt. We don't start out strong, but we learn. We survive. And you will too." Virel was silent for a moment. Then she slowly nodded. Maybe she wasn't strong now, but perhaps with time she could be. And maybe, just maybe, she had finally found someone who believed in her. The days passed, and Virel slowly adjusted to life aboard the Starfall. It was nothing like the royal palace. There were no servants, no grand feasts, no shining crystal halls. Instead, there was hard work, noisy machinery, and the constant hum of the ship's engines. She struggled at first. Her fragile exoskeleton made lifting heavy objects difficult. Her lack of experience in basic survival skills made her feel helpless. But Elias never mocked her, never looked at her with pity. Instead, he taught her, step by step, without frustration. "Everyone starts somewhere," he told her one evening as they sat in the cockpit, watching the stars. "Strength isn't about how you're born. It's about what you do next." She had never heard words like that before. In the Axaraxis Empire, strength was everything. If you were born weak, you were discarded. But Elias didn't see things that way. To him, it wasn't about where you started, but where you were going. For the first time in her life, Virel felt hopeful, but not everyone shared that feeling. The invitation. One morning, while Elias was repairing the ship's navigation system, a message arrived. A royal seal flickered on the screen. Elias frowned. "Looks like your father wants to talk." Virel stiffened. It had only been a few weeks since she left the palace, and she hadn't expected to hear from her father so soon. Slowly, she walked to the console and pressed the activation button. The Emperor's face appeared on the screen. His gaze was sharp, unreadable. "Virel," he said. His tone was cold, but there was no immediate anger. "And the human." Elias crossed his arms. "Nice to see you too, Your Majesty." The Emperor ignored him. "You will return to the capital immediately. The High Council demands it." Virel frowned. "Why?" "There is an opportunity," the Emperor said, his voice measured. "A gathering of noble houses is taking place. It is a chance to prove yourself, to show that your union with this human is not a disgrace, but something of value." Elias raised an eyebrow. "That doesn't sound like an invitation. More like a test." The Emperor didn't deny it. "Come, or be forgotten." The screen went dark. Virel stood still for a moment, processing his words. Then she turned to Elias. "What do you think?" Elias let out a breath. "I think your father doesn't do anything without a reason." She nodded. "But we can't ignore it. If we refuse, he'll use it against us." Elias rubbed his chin. "So we go in, play their little game, and see what happens." Virel hesitated, then nodded. "All right," Elias said, leaning back in his chair. "Let's show them what we've got." The return to the palace. When the Starfall landed at the Axaraxis capital, it was clear that things hadn't changed. Nobles still walked the grand halls with their heads high, their sharp eyes filled with judgment. Whispers followed Virel wherever she went, and this time they were directed at Elias too. A human. They actually allowed him to return. Pathetic. The princess brings more shame upon herself. Elias sighed. "You aren't joking about your people being cold, huh?" Virel ignored the whispers, keeping her head high. She wouldn't show weakness here. The emperor sat on his throne, watching as they entered. Around him, nobles and military leaders stood, their expressions filled with skepticism. "You have returned," the emperor said, his voice calm. "Good. There is an important matter to discuss." A noble stepped forward, a tall Xeraxian with a golden exoskeleton. "A high council believes that your union with this human is questionable, but we are willing to reconsider if he can prove his worth." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. Some kind of test." "Indeed," the noble said. "A trial, if you will. If you pass, you may remain at the princess's side. If you fail, she will be exiled alongside you." Virel's hands clenched. "This is absurd." The emperor raised a hand, silencing the room. "This is the way of the Xeraxis Empire, Virel. If you wish to claim your place, then your human must prove himself." Elias sighed and rolled his shoulders. "All right," he said. "What's the test?" The noble smirked. "A duel." The room murmured with excitement. A duel was the perfect way to humiliate Elias. Humans were known for their intelligence, but they lacked the natural strength and battle instincts of the Xeraxians. Virel's eyes widened. "No, he's not trained for." Elias placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's fine." She looked up at him, confused. "You don't understand. Xeraxians train in combat from birth. They will tear you apart." Elias gave her a small smile. "Maybe, but I don't back down from a challenge." Virel wanted to argue, but something in his expression stopped her. Determination. Confidence. He wasn't afraid. The emperor nodded. "Then it is settled. The duel will take place tomorrow." Elias took a deep breath. "Great. Guess I better get ready." As they left the throne room, Virel grabbed his arm. "You don't have to do this." Elias chuckled. "I think I do. Look, Virel, your people think I'm weak, that I don't belong. Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. But if I don't stand up now, they'll never see me as anything else." She looked into his eyes, searching for doubt, for hesitation. She found none. "All right," she said softly. "Then we'll prepare." Elias grinned. "Now you're talking." Tomorrow, he would step into the arena. Tomorrow, he would show the Xeraxians what a human was truly capable of. The night before the duel was tense. Virel paced inside the starfall, her claws clicking against the metal floor. Her mind raced with worry. She had seen Xeraxian duels before. They were brutal. Fighters didn't hold back. Injuries were expected, sometimes even death. Elias had no exoskeleton, no enhanced strength, no combat training. How could he possibly survive? She turned to him. "Elias, you don't understand. They will come at you with full force. You won't stand a chance." Elias, sitting on a crate, calmly tightened the straps of his gloves. "You keep saying that," he said with a smirk, "but I think you're underestimating me." Virel narrowed her eyes. "I'm being realistic. You are human. You don't have our strength." Elias chuckled. "Yeah, but humans have something else. Strategy." She frowned. "Strategy won't help if you get crushed in one hit." Elias stood up and stretched. "Look, I know I can't outmatch them in raw power, but strength isn't everything. I've been in plenty of fights before, not in fancy duels, but in real fights. You'd be surprised how much you can do when you know how to think ahead." Virel crossed her arms. "You're still at a disadvantage." Elias grinned. "Then I'll just have to be smart about it." Virel sighed, realizing he wouldn't back down. "At least let me help you prepare." He nodded. "I was hoping you'd say that." Training for the impossible. They moved to the ship's cargo hold. It wasn't a proper training ground, but it would do. Virel grabbed a practice staff and tossed it to Elias. "Let's see how you handle yourself." Elias caught it easily and twirled it in his hand. "Not bad. Feels a bit heavier than what I'm used to, but I'll manage." Virel took a stance, moving with the precision of a trained warrior. "Come at me." Elias smirked. "You sure?" "I don't want to embarrass you." She narrowed her eyes. "Try me." Elias lunged, swinging his staff toward her shoulder. But Viral moved fast, faster than he expected. She ducked, sidestepped, and struck him in the ribs before he could react. He stumbled back, coughing. "All right. That was quick." Viral tilted her head. "You left yourself open." Elias rolled his shoulders. "Good to know. Let's go again." They trained for hours. Elias wasn't as strong, but he was quick, unpredictable. He dodged when she expected him to block, countered in ways that threw off her instincts. He didn't fight like a Xyraxian. He fought like a human. And it was working. By the end of the night, Viral was impressed. Elias was bruised, but still standing. He had learned her movements, adapted and adjusted his strategy. Maybe, just maybe, he had a chance. The arena. The next day, the palace arena was filled with spectators. Hadraxians of all ranks gathered, eager to see the human fight. Many expected a quick defeat. Some even placed bets on how long he would last. Viral stood at the edge of the arena, her claws digging into her palms. She hated this, but she had no choice. Elias stepped forward, dressed in simple combat gear. His opponent, a towering Tyraxian warrior named Korek, smirked at him. "You are weak, human," Korek said, flexing his powerful arms. "This will be over in seconds." Elias cracked his neck. "Guess we'll see." The signal was given. The fight began. Korek charged like a beast, his massive arms swinging. The crowd roared in excitement, expecting Elias to be knocked down instantly. But he wasn't. Elias dodged at the last second, rolling out of the way. Korek's fist slammed into the ground, cracking the stone. The crowd murmured. Elias grinned. "Not bad. But you're too slow." Korek growled and attacked again, but Elias was already moving. He ducked under a strike, then struck back, not with brute force, but with precision. A quick hit to the ribs, then a strike behind the knee. Korek stumbled. More murmurs. The human wasn't losing. Korek roared in frustration. "Stand still and fight me properly." Elias smirked. "Nah, I think I'll keep doing what works." The fight continued. Korek was stronger, but Elias was smarter. He moved like water, avoiding direct hits, striking weak points, making Korek waste his energy. The once confident warrior was slowing down. Elias saw his chance. He feinted left, then spun right, delivering a solid strike to Korek's jaw. The Xyraxian staggered. Elias followed up with a hard kick to the chest. Korek fell to the ground. Silence. Then the announcement. Winner, Elias Carter. The arena erupted. Some cheered, others shouted in disbelief. A human had defeated a Xyraxian warrior. Viral rushed into the arena, her eyes wide with shock. You actually won." Elias, breathing hard, grinned. "Told you I had a plan." The Emperor stood, watching Elias with a calculating gaze. "Interesting," he murmured. For the first time, the Xyraxians looked at Elias not with pity, but with respect. And Viral, standing beside him, felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The air in the arena still crackled with the energy of the unexpected victory. Elias stood there, sweat dripping down his forehead, his chest rising and falling rapidly. Korek, the defeated Xyraxian warrior, groaned as he struggled to sit up, his golden exoskeleton cracked in places where Elias had struck him. The entire court had been certain of the human's loss, but now they stared in stunned silence. Viral couldn't believe what she had just witnessed. She had hoped Elias would survive, maybe even hold out for a few minutes, but she had never expected him to win. She rushed to his side, her hands trembling slightly. You actually did it." Elias chuckled, wiping blood from the corner of his mouth. "Told you I had a plan." The emperor rose from his throne, his piercing gaze locked on Elias. "Impressive," he said, his deep voice carrying across the silent arena. "Few have ever bested Korak in combat. Fewer still without the strength of a Cyraxian." Korak grunted as he stood. Despite his loss, he did not look at Elias with anger, but with something else: respect. He stepped forward and extended a clawed hand. "You fight well, human." Elias blinked, surprised by the gesture, but he grinned and shook Korak's hand. "You weren't so bad yourself." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Respect for Elias was spreading. The Cyraxians, who had dismissed him as weak, were now forced to reconsider. The emperor turned his gaze toward Varel. "You chose this human over your own kind, and now he has proven himself." His sharp eyes studied Elias once more. "Perhaps we were too quick to judge." One of the nobles, a tall, sharp-featured Cyraxian, stepped forward. "This is still an embarrassment," he sneered. "An outsider winning against one of our warriors does not change the fact that he is unfit to be at the princess's side." Elias sighed. "Man, you guys really don't like admitting when you're wrong, huh?" Some in the crowd chuckled at his boldness. The noble scowled but said nothing. The emperor remained silent for a moment, then spoke. "A duel is only one measure of strength. If the human is to remain at my daughter's side, he must prove more than his ability to fight. He must show his wisdom, his worth beyond the battlefield." Virel clenched her fists. "That's unfair. He already won." The emperor raised a hand, silencing her. "If he is truly worthy, he will face the next challenge." Elias sighed and stretched his arms. "All right. What's next?" "Arm wrestling a giant lizard. Solving some kind of impossible puzzle." The emperor's lips twitched, almost like he was amused. "A diplomatic trial. One that will test his mind rather than his fists." Virel's stomach tightened. She knew exactly what her father was planning. A test of diplomacy in the Cyraxis court was far more dangerous than any physical battle. It was a game of words, power, and manipulation. Elias had survived the arena, but could he survive the ruthless minds of Cyraxian politics? The emperor turned to Elias. "You will attend tomorrow's High Council meeting as an honored guest. You will listen, you will speak, and you will prove that you deserve to stand beside my daughter, not just as a warrior, but as a leader." Elias shrugged. "Sounds easy enough." Virel grabbed his arm, pulling him aside. "You don't understand. The nobles will try to tear you apart, not with weapons, but with words. If you make even one mistake, they will use it against you." Elias smirked. "So basically, I just have to be smart and not let them push me around." She sighed. "It's more complicated than that. They'll twist your words, set traps, and manipulate you into saying something that can be used against you." Elias scratched his chin. "All right, so I just need to be careful." "Got it." Virel stared at him, frustration and admiration mixing in her gaze. "You really aren't afraid, are you?" Elias shrugged. "I've dealt with people who try to talk circles around me before. Sure, they weren't alien politicians, but I think I'll manage." Virel exhaled. "Then I'll help you prepare." That night, inside the Starfall, Virel spent hours explaining the complexities of Cyraxian diplomacy. She taught Elias about noble etiquette, the hidden meanings behind their words, the way they used status and tradition as weapons. Elias listened carefully, asking questions, making jokes here and there, but taking it all in. Despite his casual attitude, Virel could see his mind working, analyzing the situation. When the lessons were over, Elias leaned back in his chair and grinned. "So basically, it's like a big game of chess, but everyone's trying to stab each other in the back." Virel sighed. "That's a crude way of putting it, but yes." Elias smirked. "Good. I like chess." The next morning, the High Council chamber was filled with powerful nobles, all seated in a grand circular hall. When Elias entered, dressed in formal Cyraxian robes, whispers filled the room. Some looked amused, others irritated. The emperor sat at the head of the chamber. "We begin." Virel watched from the side, her heart pounding. Elias had survived the duel. But could he survive this? Elias stood tall in the grand high council chamber, his hands tucked behind his back as he observed the alien nobles around him. Their eyes held suspicion, some even disgust, but a few studied him with cautious curiosity. The room was vast, lined with towering columns, the walls etched with ancient Cyraxian symbols that glowed faintly. The council chamber was a place of power, where words held more weight than weapons. Virel stood to the side, tension clear in her posture. She had spent the entire night preparing Elias, but she still feared for him. The Cyraxian nobility was ruthless. They had spent their entire lives mastering the art of manipulation, twisting words into traps. Elias was clever, but was he prepared for this level of political warfare? The emperor's deep voice echoed through the hall. "Let us begin. Elias Carter, you have won your duel, but strength alone does not make one worthy of standing beside a Cyraxian princess. Today, you will prove whether you have the wisdom to navigate our world." A noble with dark crimson plating stepped forward, his golden eyes gleaming. A human has no place in Cyraxian affairs. He does not understand our ways. He does not know our struggles. How can we trust him? Elias met the noble's gaze without hesitation. Trust isn't given freely. It's earned. If you don't trust me now, that's fine. Give me a chance to prove myself. The noble scoffed. And how do you plan to do that, human? With your fists? This is not the arena. Elias smirked. Good. That means I won't have to get punched in the face this time. A few nobles chuckled, while others frowned. Virel's claws curled slightly. Humor was a risky strategy here. It could disarm tension, but it could also be seen as disrespectful. The emperor observed in silence, letting the nobles test Elias. Another noble, this one with sharp violet markings along her exoskeleton, leaned forward. "Let us be direct then. If you were to stand at the princess's side, what would you offer our people? What wisdom does a human have that we do not?" Elias took a slow breath, considering his words. "Humans aren't the strongest species. We aren't the fastest. We don't have natural armor or claws or enhanced senses. Compared to Cyraxians, we're weak." Whispers spread through the chamber. Some nobles nodded in agreement. Others looked smug, as if they had expected this admission. But Elias continued, "What humans do have is adaptability. We survive in the harshest conditions. We take what we have and turn it into something better. We don't just endure hardship, we grow from it. That's why we explore the stars. That's why we build alliances. And that's why I won my duel yesterday." The chamber was silent for a moment. The violet-marked noble narrowed her eyes. "So you claim to be resourceful. But how does that make you worthy of the princess?" Elias tilted his head. "Because I don't just care about winning. I care about Virel. I didn't fight yesterday just for myself. I fought because I wouldn't let her be cast aside." His gaze swept across the room. "And I know that's not something you all care about. I know some of you see her as damaged, unfit, less worthy because of her impairment." A few nobles stiffened. Others avoided his gaze. Elias continued, voice firm. "Where I come from, we don't judge people by what they lack. We judge them by what they do. And from what I've seen, Virel is stronger than any of you." Virel's eyes widened slightly. She had never heard anyone speak about her like that before, not even among her own people. A warmth spread through her chest. The crimson-plated noble sneered. "You speak boldly, but words are wind. What proof do you have that you belong among us?" Elias smirked. "I already proved it in the arena. And now I'm standing here, holding my own against you all in a room full of politicians who would love to see me fail." He spread his hands. "That alone should tell you I'm not going anywhere." The chamber murmured again. The emperor, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally leaned forward. His gaze was unreadable, his claws resting lightly on the arm of his throne. "You have confidence, human. That is clear." Elias nodded. "I have confidence because I believe in what I'm saying." The emperor studied him for a long moment, then turned to the nobles. "You have tested him. You have challenged him. Now, I ask you, has he proven himself?" There was hesitation. Some nobles exchanged glances. A few looked displeased, but others seemed thoughtful. The violet-marked noble finally spoke. "He is unconventional, but he is not without merit." The crimson-plated noble exhaled sharply, but grudgingly nodded. "Annoying, but not a fool." A few others murmured in agreement. The emperor nodded slowly, then turned his gaze to Virel. "You have fought for this human's place at your side. Now tell me, daughter, do you still stand by your choice?" Virel met her father's gaze without hesitation. "I do." The emperor's piercing eyes shifted back to Elias. Then, after a long silence, he nodded. "Very well." He stood, his deep voice carrying through the chamber. "Elias Carter has proven himself, both in combat and in council. He will not be cast aside." Elias exhaled slightly. Virel felt her heart pound. But then, the emperor's expression darkened. "However, one final challenge remains." Elias groaned. "Of course there is." The emperor's gaze turned cold. "You have proven yourself in war and in words, but now you must prove yourself in loyalty." Virel stiffened. She had a bad feeling about this. The emperor's voice was calm, but firm. "You will be given a mission, a task that will determine your true worth to the Exiraxian people. Succeed, and you will have my blessing. Fail, and you will leave this world forever." The chamber fell silent. Elias sighed, rolling his shoulders. "All right, what's the mission?" The emperor's expression did not change. "You must go to the warfront and survive." Virel felt her breath catch. Elias raised an eyebrow. "That's it? Just survive?" The emperor's eyes gleamed. "Survive and return." The weight of those words settled over the chamber. Elias glanced at Virel and gave her a small, confident smile. "Well, guess I better pack my bags." But Virel knew the truth. If Elias went to the warfront, he might never come back. Elias sat inside the small transport ship, staring at the vast expanse of space through the reinforced window. The warfront was not just some distant battlefield. It was a brutal, chaotic war zone where even the strongest warriors struggled to survive. The Exiraxian Empire had been locked in conflict with the Gorgith, a species known for their relentless aggression and monstrous strength. If Elias wanted to prove himself, he had to survive this war and return to Virel. He exhaled and leaned back in his seat, glancing at the other Exiraxian warriors around him. Most ignored him, some sneered, and a few whispered to each other. They still didn't believe in him. To them, he was just a weak human, unworthy of being in their ranks. Virel had been furious when she heard about the mission. She had argued with her father, but the emperor was firm. This was Elias's final trial. If he survived, no one would question his place beside her ever again. The transport ship jolted as it entered the planet's atmosphere. Red warning lights flickered, and the pilot's voice crackled over the comms. "Brace yourselves. Enemy fire incoming." Explosions lit up the sky as the ship swerved, dodging energy blasts from the ground. The Exiraxian warriors quickly prepared their weapons, their movements precise and disciplined. Elias gripped the straps of his harness, heart pounding. With a loud crash, the ship landed roughly, the doors hissing open to reveal the battlefield. It was pure chaos. Blaster fire streaked across the air. Explosions sent dirt and debris flying, and monstrous Gorgeth warriors charged forward, their heavy footsteps shaking the ground. The Exiraxians leaped into action, their movements swift and deadly. Elias unbuckled himself and grabbed his weapon, a high-powered plasma rifle they had reluctantly given him. He had trained with it before leaving, but this was different. This was real. A massive Gorgoth warrior roared and charged at him, its thick, armored skin absorbing the first few shots he fired. Elias cursed under his breath and rolled to the side just as the creature's massive claws tore into the ground where he had been standing. "Move, human," one of the Azaraxian soldiers snapped, slashing at another Gorgoth with his energy blade. Elias didn't hesitate. He had fought in tough situations before, but nothing like this. He had to be smart. He had to be fast. Instead of firing wildly, he aimed carefully. He remembered the weak points Varel had taught him. Joints, neck, eyes. He waited for the right moment, then fired a concentrated plasma shot directly into the Gorgoth's throat. The creature roared, stumbled back, and fell. The Zyraxian warrior beside him paused for a second, surprised. Elias grinned. "Told you I could handle myself." There was no time for celebration. More Gorgoth poured in, and the battle raged on. Hours passed, the sky darkening as smoke and fire filled the air. Elias fought alongside the Zyraxians, covering their flanks, taking down enemies, proving that he wasn't just some weak outsider. By the time the battle ended, Elias was covered in dirt and sweat, his muscles aching, but he was still standing. The Zyraxian commander approached him, studying him with a new expression, not of disdain, but of respect. "You fight well, human." Elias wiped the blood from his forehead. "You're not so bad yourself." The commander smirked slightly before turning to the others. "Prepare for extraction. We've won this battle." Elias exhaled in relief. He had survived. Now he just had to get back. The return journey felt longer. He was exhausted, but his mind kept replaying the battle. He had proven himself, but would it be enough? When the transport ship landed back on Xyraxis Prime, Varel was waiting. The moment Elias stepped out, she rushed toward him, scanning him for injuries. "You made it," she breathed. He grinned. "Told you I would." The Emperor and the High Council stood nearby, watching. The nobles who had doubted him now saw a warrior, not just a human. The Emperor stepped forward, his piercing gaze locking onto Elias. "You have returned." Elias stood tall. "Yeah, and I'm not leaving." The Emperor was silent for a moment, then nodded. "You have passed the trial. You have proven your strength, your wisdom, and your loyalty." He turned to the gathered nobles. "From this day forward, Elias Carter is not an outsider. He is one of us." Viral's eyes widened. She had fought for this moment, but now that it was real, she could hardly believe it. Elias smirked. "Does that mean I get an official title? Maybe Champion of Tyraxis, or something cool like that?" Some of the nobles actually chuckled. The Emperor shook his head, but there was a hint of amusement in his eyes. "You may choose your own title, within reason." Elias glanced at Virel and took her hand. "I already have what I wanted." The Emperor studied him for a long moment, then finally spoke. "Very well. My daughter has chosen you, and you have proven yourself worthy. The court will recognize your place at her side." The nobles murmured, some reluctantly agreeing, others nodding in acceptance. Virel tightened her grip on Elias's hand. She had always been rejected, cast aside, treated as lesser because of her impairment. But Elias had never seen her that way. He had fought for her, just as she had fought for him. As they stood before the court, together, Elias smiled at her. "So, does this mean we're officially engaged now?" Virel laughed softly. "I suppose it does." Elias grinned. "Great, because I've got a whole list of wedding ideas, and I think you're going to love them." The nobles groaned. Virel rolled her eyes, but she couldn't stop smiling. The human had come to Xyraxis as an outsider. Now he was home.